Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Okay, I think we're live now. Good morning. I'm Dr. Bill Doe. I'll introduce myself shortly, but I'm the moderator for this session today. I have to make a couple of administrative announcements before we get started. So if you'll bear with me on that. First of all, it's 2 days after the solar eclipse, and today is Wednesday, the 10th of April, in case you're coming from some strange place or something, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning, Mountain Time. So this is panel number 17945. We are being recorded and we are being live streamed, so hence I need to make all these announcements. The title of this panel session today is How Will Emerging Technologies Change What It Means to Be Human? So hopefully that's where you want to be, is that panel. First I'm going to read a land acknowledgement statement, which we read at all of our events here at CU Boulder. The University of Colorado Boulder, which is Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the university can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this in several ways: by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty in their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success and integrating indigenous knowledge, and consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is both inclusive and respectful. Thank you. I also want to address how we're going to do the question and answer protocol for today. Here's how we're going to do that. We're going to have time at the end, hopefully up to a half hour, to have some lively discussion between your questions and the panel members. We're using a note card system to receive anonymous questions from the audience. So you don't have to put your name on there. At any time in the session, you raise your hand and somebody will come by and give you a note card and a pencil. And then when you're finished writing your question, you raise your hand again and they'll come and pick it up and bring it up to me. And as the moderator, I get a chance to go through the questions. I might combine some questions. I might slightly modify them so we can get some discussion going. We're going to give priority to student questions if we have any students in the audience. And I mentioned that it's being recorded and live stream link. Okay, so let me get started with the panel here. First of all, for myself, I'm with the College of Engineering and Applied Science here at CU Boulder. I'm a member of the Dean's Engineering staff responsible for developing our research program for the college, which has over 350 faculty and $180 million of research annually. And in our college, our faculty and students are performing cutting-edge research in emerging technologies across the spectrum of aerospace sciences, environmental change, robotics, materials, biomedical devices, artificial intelligence, and many more engineering research areas. Many of these are already making tremendous strides to improve society and the human experience, such as new energy-efficient materials, biomedical devices for the physically and mentally disabled, robots for use in disaster recovery. But of course, any technology also poses ethical and moral challenges to our society and the planet. And some of you may be familiar with Bill McKibben, who wrote the book, The End of Nature, and his more recent book, Falter. And he says in that book that technological hubris, despite the many promises technology has, may bring about the end of human nature. So that's the proposition and conundrum that we need to address today with our panelists is what are the positive aspects of technology? How is technology going to improve our society and the human condition overall? So let me introduce the panels alphabetically, not necessarily in order to my right, but you can figure out from the names here who these folks are. The first is Amber Case. Amber is a creator, an innovator, and a nonprofit leader. She's the research director and founder of the CALM Institute in Troy, New York. She establishes partnerships with tech companies to integrate the principles of CALM technology into their product lines to create harmonious human-tech interactions. And she's even got a book called CALM Technology. I have a little bit of a Boston accent, so that's CALM, C-A-L-M. She's a graduate of Lewis and Clark College in sociology and anthropology with an emphasis on entrepreneurship. And she also has worked at the MIT Center for Civic Media. She's worked for many tech and corporate companies, to name a few: Microsoft, Bank of America, Airbnb, Deloitte, Warner Brothers, FedEx. And her areas of expertise are software design and theory, Internet of Things, data governance. And I love the fact that she has a published book called A Dictionary of Cyborg Anthropology. And you can check her out on X, Twitter, anytime. The second panelist is Moses Ma. Moses is a modern Taoist, a designer, an artist, a filmmaker, an entrepreneur, and an information revolutionary. He's a managing partner of Future Lab Ventures in San Francisco, and he describes that as a spunky little venture accelerator in areas of AI, blockchain, mobile applications, and related next-generation technologies. He has a degree in theoretical physics from Caltech. He's consulted with IBM. He's been featured in Time magazine, and he's particularly interested in the impacts of generative artificial intelligence. The third panel member is Eliot Peper. Eliot's a strategist, a creative writer, an author, a storyteller, and a world traveler. He's an independent consultant and author. He's worked with many Fortune 100 companies. He has a degree from the University of California, Santa Barbara. If you've ever been to that campus, it's the nicest campus in the nation. And then he went and got a master's at the University of California, San Diego. He's the author of 11 novels and numerous short stories focusing on the intersection of technology and culture. And his short story, Victory Condition, was actually adapted for a stage play. And you can check him out on his website, eliotpepper.com. Finally, and not least but last, Jake Sally is a producer and a video game designer, has roots in Denver. He is currently the chief operating officer for a company called Jadoo, which is a multiplayer augmented reality fighting game. His education, and I love this, is in English from Princeton University, and he also played club soccer. He's worked for Verizon. He works with virtual reality and augmented reality. He's an Emmy Award winner, having done productions for the Super Bowl, Sundance, Cannes Film Festival. He's worked with such famous people and musicians as Lil Nas. Now, I'm going to date myself here if you don't know who all these people are. Lil Nas, Snoop Dogg, and the Transformers. And he spent quite a bit of time with the movie industry in Los Angeles and Hollywood. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists that are going to speak to us. I'm going to give each of them 5 minutes to make an introduction, add to what I just said, take some perspective on this theme of our panel. And we're going to do this alphabetically, so Amber, you're on.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's an honor to be at a conference that's been running for 75 years. When I was asked to be on this panel, I thought there's always this idea of what it means to be human might change at some point, or it's the end of history, or the end of humanity. There's all these all or nothing statements that seem to come out, and I have a suspicion that it's really a good way to make sure that people read stuff and look at ads online, and that it's not the story. And I think we live currently in two dominant universes. One is when we look at science fiction and we look at things that are sensationalized and we look at things that strike fear into our hearts existentially. That's a fun thing to experience in a way, because when we go to a movie, we expect to be entertained, we expect to be stimulated, we expect to have some sort of emotions, and then we go home and we have these talking washing machines and dryers and all of this technology that's trying to entertain us in the same way, because a lot of the people that are building this technology read Popular Science and Popular Mechanics magazine, read some interesting science fiction in which everything was very exciting, watched Minority Report in which everything was hand gestures, which would be very annoying if you were to work at the DMV and do this all day for an 8-hour shift. For a 30-second shift, that's pretty good. And when you go home, you don't necessarily want your technology to be in your face. You want it to be a pass-through. And just thinking about how electricity changed our lives and how the way it was built is that we don't really notice it unless it fails. And it's set up, ideally, by electrical engineers and civil engineers and people who understand that it's fundamentally dangerous and can kill you, yet we live alongside it every single day. And we don't walk into a room and say, oh my gosh, I need to download the latest software update in order to turn on and off the lights. You can come home slightly drunk in a new place and slap the wall until you find the light switch in the dark and turn it on. And I think that's a really interesting example of a kind of pass-through technology in which you focus on the task and not the tool. And I think right now we could say, when we say what is being human, we've always been tool-using creatures. And my contention is that we're all cyborgs. We've always been cyborgs. And cyborg has two definitions. There's either Terminator or RoboCop, in which you have to have implants and you're an extension of the military, and it's very exciting. And then there's the actual definition from 1960 paper on space travel, to which any organism has external components attached to themselves to adapt to new environments. Anybody who puts on a spacesuit, or a pair of roller skates, or some fins to go underwater, or a pair of glasses so that you can see while you drive, is a cyborg. It's just not as exciting of a definition as something that you might read. And so I think the main concerns that I've been seeing is that when we think about, this thing is completely going to take over, it's really about the fear of how humans use each other, the human use of human beings, and how we have historically treated each other through power and governance and all of these analog technologies. And that unlike an analog factory in which we're building something that's very dangerous, like extruding hot steel, and there are checks and balances around that and a mapping of how that works. We have an AI in which we haven't really mapped the boundaries, and it could just be as dangerous as electricity and hot steel in a factory. And yet a lot of the people working on it might not actually be people with experience of electrical engineering, civil engineering, and hot steel extrusion in a plant. And so I think it's this tension that has happened since the Industrial Revolution, or since we started doing centralized farming of what does it mean to be human? Is there separation of human from nature? Is there separation of human from technology? And I think that might be a little bit more of where we're seeing the tension. So.
Thank you, that's perfect. Thank you for that introduction. Moses, I think you're next.
Hi, everybody. I follow the rules of CWA, which is not to make slides, and don't think about your presentation before you do it. And see what comes up, and if you can surprise yourself. So I did focus on one word, coagunation. It's a term from paleobiology where single-cell organisms become multi-cell organisms about 400 million years ago. And I think that humanity is going through a similar process that I call societal coagunation, where people learn to solve problems. I don't see climate change or pandemics as horrible disasters. I see them as learning opportunities for humanity. So our company, we decided not to be like normal venture capital or venture incubators. And we said, let's look at solving really big problems. So we have like one group that's working on how do you end pandemics forever? And we think it's actually doable for very little money if only people would listen, right? This is the curse of being named Moses, right? I'm just like railing in the dark and no one listens. Another one that's actually much easier to sell in the US is the World Economic Forum said that 85 million jobs will be lost due to AI, right? No one's talking about it, but that's 3 times the impact of COVID, right? And it's going to cause a recession if companies act like humans and are stupid and end up doing the corporate equivalent of hoarding toilet paper, which is laying off to catch up. All you have to do is one simple thing, train everybody before you do layoffs. Then you can minimize the number of layoffs. So that's one project we're doing, and we call it Manhattan 2, because instead of creating a critical mass of plutonium, we wanted to create a critical mass of human cognitive endeavor, so that everybody kind of pulls the oars in the same direction, and let's see if we can train 100 million people. Now, what we found is when you try to train 100 million people, it's very difficult, right? So you have to get governments involved, and they tend to love your idea and then suddenly get the vapors when it's time to get funding, right? So, oh my God, we'll do it next, election cycle, right? But we are talking to some really interesting and bright politicians, like the governor's office in California. We're working with Fiona Ma, the state treasurer. And actually in your state, we've begun a conversation with Michael Bennet, who's a really great US senator here. And we're reaching out to 20 innovation ministries in Europe. So it's possible to do stuff like this, but I think the key to remember is this. The story I tell all my consulting clients is that in 1905, Leon Serpellet won the world land speed record and drove 75 miles an hour in a little steam engine car called the Easter egg. And at that time, it was unbelievable, right? He was like a daredevil. But today, how many of you can drive 75 while putting on makeup or drinking coffee, right? The amazing thing is that it didn't take 100 years for us to evolve that. We wake up, when you're born, they put you in driver training, and you're driving 75 miles an hour. You didn't have to evolve this ability. The same thing's going to be true for all this technology. Right now, you look at kids, oh my God, how can they multitask? I believe in 100 years, everyone can multitask a bit. And they can actually come up with ideas as good as Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. It's a natural tendency in human beings once you get driver's training, right? So our first attempt at driver's training will be this thing we call AI Mastermind, where we use AI to teach AI. And we think we can do training for, instead of $1,000 a piece, a person, as low as $100 or $10. So we're gonna test this with a large bank to train everyone in the company how to develop AI literacy and proficiency for about $20 per person. So if that actually works, we're going to open source it and give it to the world and try to get as many people to do this. So we're reaching out to countries saying, we'll train every startup in your country for $1 each. And they're going, oh, that's an interesting price. And we don't care about the money, which makes us really difficult to fund through venture capital. because they're going like, wait, you've got a great product here. We can make a lot of money. Who cares about the world? Let's make money. And then we said, no, what we want to do is actually make a difference in the world. So I'm going to ask all of you to come and join us if you're interested in saving the world and saving a couple of million jobs in the US. And just come to the website, manhattan2.team, and you can sign up or just come up afterwards and talk to me. We'd love to work with you.
Thanks, Moses. Appreciate it. Very great insights. Eliot, you're next.
So when I think about how emerging technology might change what it means to be human, the first thing that comes to mind is my grandmother. And she grew up without cars, without electricity, without planes, certainly without computers, without nuclear power, also without nuclear weapons, without the smallpox vaccine, without a lot of the things that I grew up taking for granted. I have a 1-year-old son, and when I think about the world he's growing up in, he has all of the things I just mentioned. He has mRNA vaccines, he has the internet, he has these new emerging AI technologies. He's growing up in a world that has very different affordances, right? Like technology offers you new choices. It offers you the choice to build nuclear power or nuclear weapons. And when I think about what it means for the people in this room, what it means for me to have those technologies in my life, you know, if you read Machiavelli, not just his famous book, The Prince, but his diaries and letters, you immediately see that in Renaissance Italy, people talked about infectious disease the way we talk about weather, right? So, oh, you're going to Colorado. Oh, did we just lose the mics? Yeah. Emerging technology. Are we back?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You know, if you were to travel, still not, I'm hearing from people in back that we're still not back. Yeah, we just got feedback. A little closer, is this better? How's that? All right, we'll give it a shot. If you were traveling from one city to another, you would try to get intel on what illnesses were there when you know before you went, and people would trade rumors about that. Just like I checked the weather before coming to Boulder for this conference. That's something we just don't really have to do today. I didn't check public health websites before agreeing to come do this talk. Obviously, some of us were doing that a few years ago, but right now it's not as important. And I also think about doing laundry, which is really annoying. I don't think any of us love doing laundry, but doing laundry without a washing machine would take most of your day, right? And so that means that for millions and millions and millions of people across the world, a lot of their time was spent only on laundry. And so I think that there are these very practical ways in which technology changes how we live, right? It changes how we spend our time. A couple hundred years ago, 98% of the US population worked in farming. Today, that number is less than 2%. We're all spending our time really differently. But I think the flip side of this coin and a useful way to try to figure out how technology is changing our lives is what doesn't change. And I think, Amber, you were alluding to this in your comments. There's a lot that technology hasn't changed. It hasn't changed that we love our children. It hasn't changed the importance that our friendships play in our lives. It hasn't changed the importance of status hierarchies and people wanting power, people wanting wealth. It's sort of funny if you watch like any of the popular Netflix historical dramas, right? Like in many ways, the fact that the setting, like the technology available to the people in those obviously fictionalized worlds, is sort of irrelevant to the story because people aren't paying attention to it. Like all of the drama in the story is around relationships and how people's incentives and desires conflict with each other and how that resolves. And Amber also mentioned that sort of technology, you know technology is successful when it becomes invisible. And I know that last weekend there were, the public utility here cut power for Boulder because they were afraid that the high winds might throw down lines and start a fire, right? That's when you realize how important electricity is. So I think there's that interesting tension where the most successful technologies we think about very little, and the things that we think about haven't changed very much at all.
Thanks, Eliot. Great insights. Appreciate it. And again, Jake, you're on.
All right, let's do this. So just to double down before I start, because I am an English major, so I'm not coming from a technical background. I'm going to keep this really constrained to my area of expertise, which is the content side of the world, and how technology and content and entertainment kind of all play together and how that can possibly affect the human experience. So I think there's 3 things that technology does really well. One, the ability for people to make higher quality content using technology is skyrocketing. Previously, you had to have hundreds of people, thousands of people, operations, so much money in order to make these incredible blockbuster films. And where we're heading now is that a kid in Idaho can have a laptop and make something that looks really, really good. What this means is that the types of stories that are being told are expanding exponentially. And that's really interesting. So let's hold that piece in our head, quality of content. The second thing is that this technology is allowing people to iterate faster. And for content, anyone who's made anything will know the more swings you get at bat, the better off you're gonna be. So instead of being like, hey, I have this idea in my head, I really wanna make it, you kind of make a script and then everyone shows up, millions of dollars have been spent, we're gonna make this thing. You can actually make storyboards, you can actually make previs, and all of these things allow you to iterate through the content itself to get it better and better and better. The whole point of iteration when it comes to content is getting people to dream the same dream. If you can do that, when you show up to make something, if you're like, hey, I want to make a fantasy project, there's a pretty wide range of fantasy. We've got Lord of the Rings to Game of Thrones. That's a very different fantasy. So that allows people to have very, 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 very specific content that they make. The quality's getting higher, the specificity's getting better, and most importantly, technology is enabling better distribution. Previously, if I wanted to make a feature film, the only way I could do this is I had to work within a studio system. You have executives that are choosing a couple films every year that are going to be made. You have these theaters that are then choosing, hey, we're going to have these films come out. Original Star Wars, amazing, Goonies, we love it. But the number of films is actually relatively low. Now, if I want to make a film, it's infinite. I can release this in 30 pieces on TikTok. I can release this direct to consumers through a website. You can, of course, still use the traditional studio system, but you also have the ability to stream this now on your device. You don't even have to go to the theater. And there are certain types of films, arguably, that make more sense to watch on your laptop in bed than they do in a theater. That de-risks it for the distributor. So what do we have? We have 3 things. We have the quality of content's getting higher, the number of iterations in making that content, and therefore specificity is getting way better, and the ways you can distribute that content are expanding exponentially. I can be an individual person. I can be a kid at CU Boulder with a little bit of gumption and a laptop and distribute a film or short film or some bastard version that's 70 minutes that makes no sense in any of these different systems. And that can not only exist in the world, but there is a path, however small, to actually being able to make your money back. And so when we think about the human experience, the thing that keeps me up at night all the time is just this idea of the gradient, right? Humans sit on a gradient. This gradient is pretty wide, but our access to that gradient through content has been relatively small for a pretty long time. So the wider the gradient is, the more access to the range of human experience we all have, the better off we are as people, and the more informed we can be as humans with that experience. So I'll keep mine short. I want to get into the questions. That's where it gets really fun. But I think it's just a really helpful thing for us all to keep in mind as we kind of go through this.
Thanks to all our panelists on those initial introductions. The good news is we've now got almost 40 minutes for discussion. The bad news is that I haven't gotten any questions from the audience yet. So hopefully someone's going to bring me up some cards, because I can wing it for a while. And I'll do that to get started, but then hopefully we get some questions up here, and we can start to merge those questions. Yes, Moses has an alibi.
I could, mention something that refers to that. OpenAI Sora, it can make a minute movie that looks pretty good for probably $100. Pixar pays 1.5 million per minute for their movies. So you're getting something like a 10,000x improvement in ROI. Of course, it's going to take a while to get there, but I think that's going to revolutionize the art of storytelling.
So I think the question with that, though, is that the first iteration of the video, or is that final pixel of the video? Because my wife's a screenwriter, for reference. When she writes a script, she probably writes, I don't know, 75 drafts of it. The first 60 are awful. I read them all. And then slowly it starts getting into that good range. So just question back to you, Moses, is like, is that $100 for the version that they're like, yes, I want to distribute that, or is that $100 for this is kind of like my Scratchpad version?
Well, we don't know the pricing for that yet, but my prediction is that they can't charge more than $100 to $1,000, or consumers won't use it. So my guess is that they'll hit that price point. But I have this thing called the cycle of frustration for inventions, and pretty soon you're going to realize, oh, this isn't what they promised. You can only make kind of like the same looking movies because they grabbed that footage to learn from. It all looks the same. So if you really want to be truly creative, you can't use a system that is based in what I call stochastic plagiarism. Okay. So I think that it's a really interesting time to be alive. It's really similar to when photography was invented in the late 1800s. There was this one artist who was quoted. He saw the first camera, and he did an interview in a paper, and he said, "I have enjoyed a great life as an artist. I'm sorry to have witnessed the death of art," right? But it didn't happen. The usage of portrait painting actually went up because it used to cost you like $50,000 to do a selfie, right? You have to hire an artist to paint you. Now that it was like, oh my God, it's only cost $50 to get a photograph, the interest in portraiture went way up, and the number of artists working in portraiture actually increased. And it didn't cause the end of art, it just morphed it into this new kind of art. And that's what we're inventing now. There's going to be a new school of art coming out that is unlike anything we've seen. But it's going to be very exciting to watch it blossom and grow.
You know, it's sort of interesting that when Pixar originally spun out of Lucasfilm in the 80s, they didn't make movies. They made graphic software, and they desperately tried to sell that software to production companies that were making commercials and other films, actually mostly commercials. And they ground along for years trying to unsuccessfully sell their computer animation software. And finally, Steve Jobs, who had been one of their initial investors when Pixar spun out, wrote them one last check and said, okay, look, like rather than trying to sell the tool, you need to use the tool to make the movie. And that resulted in the first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, right? And since then, everyone's heard of Pixar. I actually used to live a few blocks away from Pixar, but we only know it because they actually put those tools to use to make something people actually wanted. And it's interesting that Steve was the person who pushed them to do that, because that's also really what Apple's known for. frankly, Apple is not known for new technology. What they're really, really good at is taking existing technology and packaging it into things that people really, really want. And I'm very curious to see some of the, the future that Jake was just describing, right? Like actually putting these tools, right now there's a lot of excitement around generative AI tools. I'm really excited to see the result of the use of those tools, right? Like what can you make that's so compelling that actually moves someone rather than just the discussion of the tools themselves?
When I was young, I took a screenwriting course from Robert McKee, and it was the first time he held it in LA. And I remember that half the room was Pixar, right? Because they found out the key was not to hire storytellers, but force their engineers to understand storytelling and embed it in the technology. So that's actually what enabled them to be successful, is when you basically are liberal arts injected into STEM, right? If you can bring liberal arts and engineering together, that's where you get success.
Great. Thank you for your questions. We've got a couple here. I do want to ask, the panelists all gave great introductions, and I think all of you essentially said that we've been living with technologies for a long time, and that it's made our lives more convenient, that in many cases it's empowered people in ways that they couldn't be empowered before that technology. But I'm going to posit that, and to use Moses' point about driving, I'm not sure it's a good thing that everybody's driving. I commute every day, and it's dangerous out there. And less people seem to be getting instruction on how to drive. And so 75 means 95. So my question to each of you, maybe you can respond a little bit. What about the fact that these technologies are really creating a lot more stress on the humans? I think about my workplace in the university, emails, cell phone texts. It seems like we're all working 24/7 now because the technology has basically made everybody accessible to us. Our lives are now stressful in ways that they weren't stressful before all these technologies showed up on our doorstep. Now, so there's trade-offs. So let me start down there with Jake and maybe mention, what's your thoughts on that?
Evolve or die. I really cannot, I stand by this really strongly. Now look, that doesn't mean you need to answer every email you get. I haven't looked at my personal inbox in weeks, But I think it's the reality of the world we live in. I tell filmmakers this a lot, is if you're shooting on film, you are fucked. So, you can choose to do it in the really small context of I want to be an artist, but in terms of being a successful filmmaker, it's over. Those days are really, really disappearing. Maybe there's going to be one standout person who can pull it off, but I think that when we look at all these technologies, you cannot put this back in the box. Can't do it. Now, I think what that means is we have to think about how do we responsibly use these technologies, when do we responsibly introduce these technologies, especially to kids. Every single time I meet someone who is a new parent, my first question is, okay, so what's your plan for your kid when it comes to of just what is the age? You don't want to socially stunt your kid's growth if all of the social circles are digital, but at the same time, you don't want them to be, at the park sitting on their iPad. I went to the Maldives for my honeymoon recently, and we're in an underwater restaurant. Incredible. Another family walks in, their kids they're old enough to appreciate it. They're 11. They're both on iPads. That rips my heart out. That's terrible. But can't put the genie back in the bottle. You really, I think when we talk about human experience, it is part of the human experience now. So our job is to think about how do we responsibly engage with it, and really what's the reality of that. And I think, we can't be Luddites.
I think that's the question. And there are a couple questions from the audience about that. So that was the senior citizen question, which I include myself in. about, basically deal with it. And if you want to, be part of the modern society and modern world, you're going to have to basically figure out which of these, you got to use some of this and figure out how to best learn it and get help if you need to, right?
Exactly. Or you have the leverage to be like, I don't care and I don't have to care. Christopher Nolan doesn't have Twitter. It's fine, because he's hit a threshold as a filmmaker where he doesn't have to care anymore. And that's a great place to be too. So, weirdly, it's like evolve or die, and then you can kind of just do whatever you want.
Amber, what are your thoughts on that?
One of my favorite people, Lisa Reichelt, calls it continuous partial attention. Where it's weird on a phone versus having a landline phone where you might pick up and call somebody for a while and have long thoughts and not have anything really interrupt you. Now you have, everybody's phone in here probably has 50 unfinished conversations because they're texting. And you're in one time zone, and they're in another social time zone, and so you have this simultaneous time that brings you this over proximity of all things, as Freud called it in Civilization and Discontents. And I don't think, when we say modern, I always laugh because I don't think we've ever been modern. I think we're more in a Victorian 2.0 landscape, in which instead of a bunch of cool new mechanical stuff and automatons that were really all the rage, along with Scheele's green made with arsenic put on walls, we have the same kind of stuff, kind of poisoning our time and our attention. And I was reminded of this story of when the first window shopping came out. There was a fair in France, and you can put a huge plate glass window up. And then, even at night, and your store's not open, you could see the beautiful dresses in the window through the glass. And now everyone can shop just by walking by. You can bring a bit of the inside to the outside world. And so all of these women were buying all of these dresses. And the husbands were saying, this is the problem with the glass window. Please refund my purchase. This is no one's fault. This is your fault. You've made something so exciting, such a cornucopia of excess, such a siren call that no one can resist it. And I see people using TikTok like that, which is just deliberately built to work with your need for really just taking a walk and seeing new stuff. You see dogs and they're like, yeah, I want to walk down the street. Analog version of Twitter, sniff the hydrant, check out how many new posts are there. And that's what we want to do as humans. We want to go outside and we want to have all of this new stuff. And so instead we go and have a very small fraction of that is not nourishing at all, of getting all this new stuff from afar, feeling bad, and then feeling bad again and clicking on it. And then when we feel bad enough, we're more likely to click on an ad, and then the whole process starts again. And so we can't say, let's regulate the algorithms because some new app will come out and everybody will say, well, I'm going to use this anyway and hack my phone to use it. But I think the boundary maintenance has to start with us. We have to wake up in the morning, all of us, and say, do I want to have my own thoughts? Or do I want to be inundated by the thoughts of others that have been specifically packaged in a way to make me distracted from what I really want to do? And it's often like when you take a road trip, that first 1 or 2 hours, you're still thinking about, did I leave on the stove? And what about that bill that I haven't paid? And I had this argument with this person over text, and I didn't use enough emojis, so I don't know if they understood whether I was joking or not. And do they really hate me or not? But they didn't respond in 5 minutes, and so I don't know. And then there's that period of time where you just get out in that boundary and say, oh, I remember the things I really wanted to do with my life. Oh, I remember the really important stuff. And guess what? You don't respond to a thing for a week. If it's really important, someone will send that message to you. And so I think there's just these little tiny cuts that are happening on the sense of self and the sense of community. And if we realize when we're actually looking at something, is this really an important email? Could this be a phone call? Do I really have to respond to this? And go on social media and say, is this really an argument that I need to be a part of? And stop. We have the power to understand what we're doing with it and get our time back a little bit and say, aha, I do have time in the day to go on a walk at sunset with my partner and hold hands and maybe complain a little bit about the LED streetlights that make everything far less romantic, but are more energy efficient. But it's a thing where we have this, technology, or media rather, like a gas, seems to expand to fill every available space in our lives. Or it's like the new cigarettes, don't have anything to do, light up a TikTok app. And if we can get a little bit of distance from it, remember, then we could have days that are really about having a full experience of a time and really being present. But I think that practice, which is not speed running a meditation app, but actually spending time training our brains to get that time back and training that algorithm in our own mind to respond appropriately to stimuli. I think we really have an opportunity to do it. And I think we've probably hit that saturation point right now where we're like, I don't actually enjoy being on my phone. This is not fun most of the time. But I think we will increasingly have the tools in our own mind to be able to stop doing that, as long as we realize that it's possible and that part of it is our responsibility and no one else is out there, because the incentive models are inherently against our attention.
So that sounds like remaining calm. Remain calm amidst when everybody else is losing their heads around this stuff. You must remain calm and center yourself.
Move more slowly if you can.
And think. Moses, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I was mentioning before the 5 steps or cycle of innovation. The first step is always wonder. Like, do you guys remember the first time you used the cell phone? And who did you call? Mom, I'm talking to you while driving. You're like so happy. And then the technology disappears into the fabric of your life. Then you start getting annoyed. Then you get frustrated. And then it begins anew. Like some new technology comes to solve it. And I think that what we as humans need to do is achieve what the Buddhists call mudita, or appreciative joy, like learning how to stay in that state of wonder longer and just enjoying that, and then enjoying who you're talking to. And realize that we don't need to complain so much, all right? And I think if we do that, then the mindset shift will make it easier for us to balance our lives out. I believe that human beings are moving in that direction, and we'll see if we get there.
Eliot?
So computers came as a sort of a really big surprise to economists, American economists. Before computers were widespread, before people had PCs and companies really integrated them into operations, most American economists predicted that there would be huge increases in productivity once computers were widely adopted. And you can understand that expectation. You suddenly have a machine that can be used for so many different tasks that used to be done manually. It seems like everyone would just accomplish much more if you sort of had this at your fingertips all day long. What actually happened is in the 90s, there was a boost in productivity, and then everything flattened out, which economists have been trying to explain ever since. That basically computers led to a much smaller increase in overall economic productivity than anyone had been expecting or projecting. And the best explanation so far, and maybe it will be displaced in the future, but the best explanation so far is simply that increase in productivity did happen. That computers, if you're an accountant and you no longer have to do your calculations with a pencil, it's a hell of a lot better to have an Excel spreadsheet, right? So the increase in productivity did happen. It's just that what also happened is email and Slack and everything else that filled up the time that you had bought with that productivity. So everybody's being much more productive, but they're also spending a whole lot more time basically on mostly comms. Basically, you're talking to each other like with computers. And so instead of getting a 5-day weekend, or instead of the economy, the GDP going dramatically up, we just used that surplus to send emails to each other, which is an interesting choice. So like that just sort of like provides maybe a little bit of context, like from the anecdotes that we've been talking about, to sort of broaden it out to talk about the country in general and then sort of the world. But to broaden that picture further, I actually think like an important thing to keep in mind here is that all of this, we're still really early. Like computers are effectively a brand new technology. The internet is even newer. And when we're talking about the stuff on some of the things on this panel, like they're literally being invented as we speak. And if you look at the history of technological adoption across human culture, it basically takes time for us to figure out the best uses for things. So when the printing press was first developed, I mean, it led to 100 years of war in Europe as people figured out that you could do really good propaganda and, basically religious avocation, like with the printing press. And it took a long time, multiple generations, for humans to figure out, okay, like the printing press is really useful for some things, we have to be careful with these other things, and you modulate it. It's sort of like the joke that Fox News did to our parents' generation what they said video games would do to us, right? So, like when I think about my parents and their friends, they would, like, because television was new for them, I grew up with television being a thing, and I was very used to assuming that what I saw on television wasn't real or had been, really massaged. Right? Whereas they took it more seriously than me. And I'm sure that I am in exactly the same position right now, right? There are places that I look in the world where I make assumptions that someone who's 19 doesn't, right? And so I sort of think that while we might be spending a lot of time sort of like on bullshit with technology, and maybe we've overinvested in that we also should cut ourselves a little slack in the sense that, like, we're all figuring this out together, and expecting that we're going to get it right the first time is, it is pretty unreasonable.
That's a great segue. I'm going to work back down the line here, because a number of the questions, and one of you mentioned TikTok, and this is not a political question, but we've mentioned about, okay, each individual needs to regulate themselves around this stuff, but what about government? Should government be regulating some of this stuff? And specifically the AI question about, whether there's a role for government in trying to regulate. Do we just let this stuff go unbounded? I mean, we have regulation on TV, we have regulation on a lot of technology, electricity. A lot of things are regulated. Should some of these new technologies, particularly AI, be regulated?
So I'm starting.
Yeah.
So I think that government just plays an obvious and fundamental role in society, and I think that one of the how do I phrase this? I went to college and graduate school for international affairs. So we were studying, I was studying treaties and basically government policy the whole time. And I remember when I was younger being very, very frustrated because regulators were so slow to respond to new technology. And that's not even talking about a current, TikTok or whatever. This is the technologies when I was in college. It just felt like whenever you're on a frontier, government felt so far behind. And I remember feeling so frustrated by that, because it always felt like the folks in both researchers and people in the private sector were thinking about all of these big ideas, and that would require new laws, and that lawmakers were just way out of step with that and trying to catch up. And over time, I've sort of realized that I think that the slowness of regulators is as often a feature as a bug. That you have these sort of spiky frontiers where people are experimenting with new things, and a lot of those experiments are going to go wrong. Some of those experiments are going to go right, and no one knows which is which, right? No one knows which is which. And the danger of enacting new policy too early is that enacting the right policy means you have to make a correct prediction, right? Like if you're enacting policy meant to affect the future. And you know, I write science fiction novels for a living. Like no one can predict the future. Like the more you look at any forecast that any of the smartest experts do, you realize that they don't know more than anyone else. They know a lot about the world, but they don't know anything about what's going to change the world next. And so I think that over time, I've sort of come to believe that, yeah, that actually being slow is part of what makes government an effective player in society, that you want to have enough of a playground that people can figure out what works, and once it's working, you figure out how to regulate it.
Nice. Moses?
Yeah, I think that government's a lot less effective because it really can't do a lot of stuff. Like, for example, it would be good to create a law that says AI can't kill people. But if you tell that to the defense industry, they're going to disagree, right? Because they're already building Skynet in Afghanistan. I think it's really hard to control things, but maybe we could all agree on something like, let's just make sure AI doesn't annoy people, right? Like, don't put it into traffic monitors so that you're monitored 24/7 and ticketed, and optimize the amount of money we can extract from citizens. I think that those kinds of things would be good to address first. I see AI annoying people a lot in the future, and that's maybe where government and futurists could get together and kind of set some rules. With that, I yield my time, Senator.
Thank you very much. So I think it's really interesting how, again, if you are building a house and you need to put electricity in it, there's a set of permits that you need to get, and you need to go through electrical inspection to make sure that the whole thing doesn't combust on you randomly. When you're building a physical product, you might go through underwriters' laboratories to test your product so that it doesn't explode like a hoverboard on an airplane. Those were faked underwriter laboratory certification stickers that got put on those hoverboards to say, well, it's just a sticker, right? Let's just throw it on here and then it'll pass inspection. But if you're a programmer and you are making things that increasingly have to do with life, for instance, petnet.io, a startup that said, don't need to worry about feeding or watering your pet ever again, because we have a system where you can set a program, it will go to our remote server, and then it will feed and water your pet at the appropriate time so that you can leave on your trip to Europe and not worry about your cat. Now, there were analog systems before that were based on power and had backup batteries, and understood that if there was an issue, there'd be this backup system, there'd be a little kibble chopper to make sure the thing didn't get stuck in the hopper, because they were more likely to be built by engineers, where you go through school and you get an engineering degree and there's an idea of redundancy and resiliency and backups, just like when you make an escalator and when it breaks, it turns into stairs. Petnet.io said, don't worry about this. And because people had used the analog version, they said, well, this is great. It's new technology. It must be fantastic. The remote server that held the scheduling codes for feeding the animals went down. They did not do much of anything until people went on Twitter and said, my pets aren't getting fed. I'm somewhere else. What's wrong? And they said, oh, sorry, there's been a remote server issue. We don't know when it'll get back up. I think one of the outages was like 3 days. So people were like calling their neighbors, trying to get them to go back in the house. Now, in the terms of service, if you were to read them, which people don't, it said, you agree that you do not hold petnet.io responsible for the care and feeding or the wellness or life or death of your animal. We are not responsible. Yet on the box, our website, it said, don't worry about it. When I always use them as an example. They've since gone out of business. But I said, if you were to do this with actual engineering principles, the first thing you would do would say, what catastrophic things could happen? How do you make the failure graceful? How do you make it so that when the power goes out, you have a system? And if it's really bad, maybe you partner with something like Petco, and you allow someone into smart lock on your door and they feed your pets, and you sign like, there's just so many things you could do as a backup plan. And then you could say, hey, we are making this thing that could kill your animal. So we're gonna engineer it like an engineer would. Now, the thing that confuses me is I can, as a 14-year-old, go on Stack Overflow, download some Xcode, make an iPhone app. And maybe there's no regulations for it, you know, if that happens. And so it's very confusing that suddenly software engineering got separated from engineering, got separated from civil engineering, mechanical engineering, all of these things, and got suddenly into this very abstract system. And now we say, well, let's put ethics into it. Let's have ethics of this and that. It's like, these things were put into the idea of how you got trained as an engineer, which would take 4 years, not 6 months. And I think that we need to really think about how much stuff has already been there in things like bridge design, to be able, or street light design or electricity design, so that you can model a system and all the issues that could happen to it, which lawyers need to do, and you study the history of it and not just the latest thing. And so if you're a lawyer, you read tons and tons of legal history. If ideally, if you're a doctor, you read lots and lots of history. You have so much that you have to go through, because on both cases, you're dealing with life and you're dealing with money and you're dealing with ethics. And suddenly, in one part of the world in which decisions are made for others, where design is governance, there's absolutely no requirement that anybody studies any history because, oh, well, learning about COBOL is boring? Really? It runs so much of the airline system. It was made to be fault-tolerant code. So I think this is really, really important to think about how that part could be put back in. And yeah, I think that government being slow, like what you said, is great. That it can be reactive, because it's not its responsibility to be. But I do think that we could learn from what's already been there and has been stable for many years.
And what about, let me ask Jake about regulating the gaming industry. Is there current regulation? What is it like, and should there be more or less?
Yeah, I mean, look, the government's woefully unequipped to regulate novel technology. Like, it's laughable to watch Congress ask questions about old social media, much less the idea of blockchain or AI. So is it equipped to do it? Should it do it? Yes. Is it equipped to do it? Not even remotely. It's laughable. It's seriously laughable. So I think the question is, like, how can the government upskill, get trained so that they can actually be equipped to do that? In the gaming space, that is largely, it's like gambling mechanics, and how pressure gets put on kids to buy things maybe if they don't actually want to. So like, hey, there's a limited sale, there's only like 5 of these items left. 5 of these items left, it's pixels. There's infinite items left. There's none of that is at play here. So I think weirdly the government's done a better job of that in terms of there's a lot more regulation that's taking place in terms of number of hours, what can and can't be done. But look, if the government moves slow, the person who suffers is consumers. Like, we've seen this with everything on the blockchain NFT side of things, is like, who gets wrecked? Consumers get wrecked. So it's a tricky one. I don't know if there's the right answer is the government just needs to, like, it's not, sometimes it's rocket science, but a lot of the times it's not. Like, again, English major, pretty up to speed on what's going on the blockchain NFT side of things from just watching some YouTube videos and going into some Discord servers. That's not crazy. And yet the government takes much slower steps. So I think the balance is to figure out is like, what is the worst case scenario? And, I'm usually in the move fast and break things, evolve or die category. But I think from a macro perspective, that can have real world consequences, and that is problematic. So the government needs to get their shit together.
Moses, you had an alibi on that.
Yeah, the subject of pets, I just want to add that one of the products I've never had time or money to build was I wanted to make a dog collar that translates what a dog's thinking or wanting into English. Like, I'm really lonely. If you get a text from your dog that says, I'm really lonely, it increases the happiness of your life. So I think rather than evolve or die and let's make money, I think people should start making products that bring greater happiness, peace, and joy in the world.
I like the dog thing. I have a red-bone coonhound, and she requires a lot of attention. And the best parts of my day are when I'm out with her walking. And
Yeah, the back channel to the dog is actually kind of useful, right? If they say I'm lonely, you could just talk to them.
Yeah.
You know, so.
I do all the time.
May I weigh in on that really quickly, because this is near and dear to my heart. I follow weirdos on Instagram a lot, and this speech pathologist showed up on my feed, with like 1 follower. And she was like, okay, I have a kid. The kid's about 2 or 3, and I have this dog, which is a smart blue heeler Australian cattle dog. They're super sharp. The dog and the human are very similarly cognitive. So she said, how about instead of me learning the dog language, the dog can learn my language? And she put down 4 buttons, which was like, eat and play and whatever. And the dog started learning the buttons. So she puts it on Instagram. Now the dog, and you could follow this, is called Hunger for Words. Her last name is Hunger, Christina Hunger. Now the dog has about 30 words and can make rudimentary sentences and jokes. So the dog, the water spills on the floor, and the dog goes, look, look, water inside, and very slowly. The little tiny breeds will speak really, really quickly, by the way. But the smarter breeds take a lot longer to figure out what they want to say. And so now this is spread all over the place, and now people put buttons with cats. And so you thought, with the dogs, it's, where do you want to play, the beach or the park? Or the vacuum is going, and then the dog says, stop, stop, bad, bad, like hate you, or like, where is this person? And then you can Skype in the dog's friend, or you can start to reason with the dog. You can say, we're coming back later, everything's okay. And the dog will say, ah, and you can get something. But with the cats, one of the videos, the cat just said, mad, 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 mad. And the adult said, why are you mad? Can you use your words? And the cat said, no. Do you have enough words? No. Can you show me where the problem is? The cat walks over, and the other cat in the house is in the sunny spot. So the adult says, do I need to make a button for the other cat's name? And the cat goes, yes, yes, yes. So it makes and then the cats are just mad about each other, about territory. So it was really fun to be able to see that. And then when you take away the buttons for the dog can't speak anymore, and is super frustrated, just barks. And so there's this amazing thing, talking about this gradient and expanding this gradient, that human-animal aspect with these little buttons that say human words is so much fun to watch, because the dogs get to learn it in their own weird way, and the humans get to record the voices for the buttons. And so all the buttons sound really weird, and they evolve together.
You all are given permission to go to that website and check it out if you want to, and spend your time looking at that. We need to close up here, so I'm going to give each person 1 minute. Eliot, I'm going to make sure he answers this one question from the audience as part of your final remarks. But I want each of you just to say, one thing that you want the audience to know about, and this could be self-promotion, by the way, a book, a website, someplace they should go after this to find out more about you and what you're doing. So, Eliot, why don't you start with that?
Sure. So yeah, someone asked a question, if I could only read one of your books, which one would you start with? So I had a book come out last fall called Foundry, and it's a spy thriller about semiconductor manufacturing. So the reason I wrote it is that if you all think about the phones that are in your pockets right now, I always think of my phone as basically like a window into the internet, right? Like you can look through it, and my focus is always on what I find inside rather than on the phone itself, on the hardware. And I went down an internet rabbit hole about basically how the chips in cutting-edge phones are made. And it's just astonishing. I mean, it's like if you think the Manhattan Project, if you watched Oppenheimer and think the Manhattan Project was impressive, like the science and engineering behind cutting-edge chips today is astonishing. Like at one point in the manufacturing process, for the chip that is powering that phone in your hand, they use EOV lithography machines, which are basically, it's a machine the size of a room. They take a drop of molten tin, drop it into a vacuum chamber, hit it with 2 lasers that vaporize the tin to create a wavelength of light that only exists naturally in space. because the atmosphere would block it if it was here on Earth. And the reason they have to do that is that you use mirrors to bounce that light onto a reticle and then use it to draw the individual circuit onto a silicon wafer. And the reason why they have to do that complicated process to do it is that we currently now draw circuits that are smaller than the natural wavelength of light on Earth. So if you imagine if you were trying to use any naturally occurring light on Earth, it would be like trying to use a huge Sharpie to do a line sketch of a portrait, right? So that's why they have to go through this process. And you have to do it 50,000 times a second with perfect accuracy, right? That's how the chip in your phone was made. And I just found that to be so astonishing. And then, as you sort of, like you pull on anything in the universe and the whole thing unravels, right? So, once you go down that rabbit hole, you realize that all the real world espionage that's going on in these supply chains, most cutting edge chips are fabbed in Taiwan, which has these obviously huge political implications. So it was just too much fun to learn about. And whenever I get that sucked into something, I have to write a book about it. And that's how Foundry came to be.
Thank you. Moses?
Yeah, I already gave you the website. I'll add why I called it Manhattan 2. A couple of my professors worked on the Manhattan Project, and it was very beautiful to hear stories about it. Like Richard Feynman talked about playing the bongo drums in the desert. It was just so romantic, and I think we can do it again, except that instead of 5,000 scientists, let's get 1 million human beings to work together to make a change in the world. And the last thing I want to leave with you is, if you want to do something positive for our project, all you have to do is take 1 minute of your life and sit in a state of gratitude about your life. And that's all we ask. That's all we want you to do. Because once you're in a state of gratitude and appreciative inquiry, that's where we're at. And we'd like to invite you to join us there. Thank you.
That's a great segue to being calm. Go ahead.
If you have kids or grandkids and you want a little bit of a teaser of a framework about how you can teach kids to have metacognition around how they use their tech, I wrote a tiny book called Kids Book About Technology. It's aimed at both parents and parents read it to kids, and kids read it to each other. And it has some cute ways of bringing up those kind of discussions together in a way that allows both kids to say, hey, Mom, you're on your phone a lot, and you're telling me not to be on my phone? Is that email really important? And then also on the kids' side. So it's literally a kid's book about technology is the title. So yeah.
Thank you. Jake, of all your many award-winning productions and things, what should we be looking at?
Yeah, probably the company I'm working at right now. It's called Jadu. If you have kids, grandkids, if you yourself are interested in fighting games like Street Fighter, we're building an augmented reality mobile game that's a fighting game. So you look through your phone's camera, on screen you'll see characters in the real world, and it has a semantic understanding of this is a flat surface, this is a wall, so the world becomes an arena. It's called Jadu. So www.jadu.ar.
Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for coming. Thanks for your questions, and hope you're going to go to more. Have a good morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.